Welcome to Enlightened, the enlightened journey of life. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and it is an honor to have you here. I am a conscious life coach and women's empowerment mentor, and I activate a potent level of self and soul inquiry with my clients, which initiates deep and lasting transformation in all areas of their lives. I am here for the full human experience, authentically and audaciously sharing my magic with the world. On this podcast, we're all about mastering life on the way to enlightenment. And as we are here having a human experience, we might as well embrace it all. We play in the space of what is real and tangible, just as much as we play in the space of esoteric and metaphysical. You'll be ignited by deep conversation, whether through my own personal musings, interviews with incredible thought leaders around the world, and everyday divine humans sharing their soulful stories. Thank you for being on this journey. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful soul. Just to let you know that listener discretion is advised for this episode and to be mindful if there are kids around, as it contains adult themes. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Enlightened podcast. And today I am joined by Vicki Smith from Power to the Pleasers. Vicki is a licensed professional counselor and coach. And Vicki, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here too.
Amazing. I'm super curious to start off this episode. I'd love to hear from you. What is it that inspires you to get up every day?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, heavy hitter right at the beginning. All right, here we go. I think, let me say this. I am a feeler. So what inspires me is being able to get up and kind of be in awe, even though in awe is kind of a big feeling, but just in little ways, like what's going to happen today? You know, like I'm sitting at my kitchen table having my coffee and a cardinal comes by and lands on a bush or something. And so I think it's just having a mindfulness lens about being open and aware to like little things that pop up and you're like, oh my God, hello bird, things like that. So it's kind of like, what's today's going to, adventure going to be like, even if it's little stuff.
I love that. That's really, really beautiful. It's the simple things, isn't it? It's just those little things that, we have no idea what our day is going to hold.
Right.
Yeah. And it's because it's summertime here in Australia. So I've been making an effort to just get up early a lot. And, sometimes I'll get up and if I'm, staying at the beach or something, I will, make an effort to go and watch the sunrise. And I always think to myself, as soon as that sun just comes up over the horizon, I'm like, well, that's the sunrise done for the day. Like I can't get that moment back. If I want to see another sunrise, I've got to get through a whole day. And it's like, what is this day going to bring? Like I find it just really catapults me into mindfulness when I just take that time to watch the sunrise. It's such a special time of the day.
Well, I envy you because I'm not an early riser, but whenever I have seen the sunrise, I have always been inspired.
There you go. So maybe it'll inspire you to get up and watch the sunrise a bit more often. Now you're, like I said, a licensed professional counselor and coach, and your company is Power to the Pleasers. Tell us all about that. What is it that you help people with?
Well, I love people pleasers and perfectionists. And the reason I do is because it's sort of the it takes one to know one. It's been my journey to work with the parts of me that have been pleasing and focused on other people and trying to do it right and make sure that everybody's happy. So I really just found that I get excited watching people that are caught in people pleasing and perfectionism untangle themselves, kind of back themselves out of it and find that they have choices that they haven't been taking, they haven't been aware of. And so, it's jazzed me up to see people find their voice and show up and speak up and start to enjoy relationships more.
I love that. I love that. Where does it come from? Where does it all start from? Where does people pleasing and, perfectionism come from?
Well, being a therapist, I can't ignore that the early childhood experiences really do form us. So, as far as the general take on where people pleasing and perfectionism comes from, it's the environment we grew up in and what we adopted from our parents, our caregivers, those people that were important authority figures in our lives about how to be in the world. And so I think a lot of us tend to come from families where there was maybe there was addiction in the and with one of our caregivers and they were absent or they weren't able to really tune in to us. And so we kind of overcompensated and made sure that we were getting attention by making them happy, making them smile, or just not causing any problems. So it could be, a family member or a caregiver that had addiction or just wasn't. I don't know if you've heard the term emotionally immature parents, but it's coming more onto the scene. Um, so I think a lot of the emotionally immature parent characteristics encapsulates where we go, okay, I've got to I've got to take care of my own self. I've got to take care of these big feelings I have because my parent isn't really there for me. But I also still need to be connected to this person because I'm a kid and I don't know that I'm, you know, unconsciously taking care of myself. I just feel what it feels like to not be connected to my parent. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to get
Mm.
positive feedback and connection from the people that are taking care of me.
Yeah. And through my experience, also through coaching, do a lot of inner child work and even really like so much deep levels of self discovery. It's that
Mm,
desire for validation. It's that essentially that dopamine hit that we get from being validated for doing the right thing and being
mhm.
praised for doing something. And when we do the wrong thing, we're reprimanded or punished, or we could even be abused for it, in some
Yeah.
family dynamics. And so it's those early years where we start forming those learning behavioral patterns that says, I need to do this in order to receive this. I need
Yes.
to say this, be this, do this, go here, be that, all of those things that then lead to this self-abandonment that is essentially people pleasing, and then obviously striving for that perfectionism for the
Yes.
validation. Mm.
Exactly. If I can have reflected back to me something positive, then I will repeat that, right?
Yeah.
And if it takes a lot of work for me to get that positive feedback, um, I'm going to get really smart about how I do it to cut down on all the work I have to do. So if it means that I just don't speak and I'm just a good girl, I'll start doing that. And
Mhm.
that can look like lots of different things. Getting A's, keeping your room clean, just, you know,
Yeah.
learning how to vacuum the house when you're even when you're a little kid and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this makes my parents happy.
Yes, yes, I got a treat for it. I got food for it. I got a toy for it. I got praise for it. Yeah,
Hmm.
all of the things. It's so interesting, isn't it? Like, and the work that I've done around, my own childhood and my own experience, and just that deep level of forgiveness as well for my parents that really just didn't even know any better, because of the way
No.
that they were brought up and their view of the world and their experiences. Even though, I have the capacity to harbor so much anger and resentment, I choose not to, because it's like, well, they were doing the best that they could with what they had and what they knew. And I think now we've got this different level of consciousness. We've got this
Hmm.
understanding. It wasn't like they didn't have the option to be, counseled through people pleasing, as the way we do in
Hmm.
our generation. It's just something that runs, continually so deep for them, in fact.
I'm glad that you've gotten to that place because I think that is one of the major stumbling blocks with people pleasers and perfectionists is I didn't get this from my parents. I didn't, it's just sort of that kind of just go through it over and over again. Why didn't I get this? And so to release yourself from that is a gift because you
Mm.
can see that every generation, yes, we build on what we knew before and what we saw them learn from, from their mistakes, and we take this learning that we didn't have to go through, and we explore and do new things. And so we just keep expanding our awareness around relationships. And they did not know. It wasn't part of that generation to be aware of have mindful parenting or things like that. It
Yeah, it
just
just didn't exist. Like mindful parenting was if they didn't get the wooden spoon out of the second drawer, right? Just slap you across the arse.
yes. Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I always look at my children, obviously their generation. I'm like, I wonder what I'm doing to fuck them up so much now that they will be in therapy in 20 years' time going, you didn't do this, mum. I'm feeling really like, the same way I have been towards my parents. I think
Hmm.
it's such a generational thing. Like, I don't have the level of consciousness that no doubt they will have in, 20 years' time. And it's one of those things, isn't it? We do what we can with what we have and what we know to the best of our
Hmm.
ability. And that's all we can do.
I know. I know. So to allow that, right? To allow the people that did the best they could teaching us about the world and how to, how to talk or how to interact with people, or um, to allow them to have had their skill set and give it to us and then allow us to add to it. It's like, okay, that's some compassion right there, right? Where
Mm.
when we let people be who they are and we realize that it wasn't, a lot of times the neglect, I think we feel, was just, unawareness from our parents. It wasn't intentional. Of course, people did have difficult experiences with their parents and dysfunction in the family that was harmful. But I think sometimes we come away and we realize, like, it was okay. I was all right. I just didn't know I needed this until I read this self-help book when I was 30 years old.
Right. And then it's like the can of worms has been popped open and you just can't get those worms back in the can once
Right,
they're open.
right, right.
I always say once you know the things, you can't unknow the things. And so what is it that you see presenting in, people that come to see you? What are some patterns that perhaps you notice in people that have these people pleasing and perfectionism tendencies? How do you essentially say, yes, that's what that is? Like what are they presenting with that is quite common or that's, duplicatable essentially between people?
Right. I think the fear of having confrontations, of fear of conflict is one. Um, the inability to really know what they want is another. People are so focused on making the other person happy, making sure they feel liked. I think that's another one. People will come in and say, like, I just don't want to worry so much about whether somebody likes me. And, I don't want to think about it so much. I don't want to replay conversations I've had with someone or have to feel like I have to prep myself for a future conversation, and just have that worst case scenario in my mind that they're going to be mad at me or judge me, or I'm going to come away feeling rejected or disconnected from them. I think it all shows up in how their relationships are feeling, if they're satisfied with their relationships, that they feel fulfilled with the people that they are close to. If there's a lot of worry and a lot of inner critic about who they should be and how they're missing the mark, then it can show up in people pleasing and
Mm.
making sure that I'm doing it right. I call it doing it right and being polite. Like, if we get caught in those, then, and that's sort of the theme of what people present when they come to therapy or coaching, then I know it's like, okay, yes, this is a people pleasing part of your personality that's taking over.
Mm. And so anyone that's listening that's like sort of nodding their head going, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm the classic people pleaser or perfectionist, that's that self-abandoning personality. What is it that they can do? Where can they even start to, journey through healing to move through it? What does that look like?
I like to use the parts of the personality as a great way to start the process of your inner work because we do have lots of different parts of our personalities that help us organize and manage our days. And some of them are about protecting us from people, right? So sometimes we put on a good image because we don't even want somebody to see, like, you hear this all the time. If people really knew me, they wouldn't like me, right? So we do a lot to protect ourselves from judgment, but we also do a lot behind the scenes to manage down our own feelings. So I like to think about that. It's not something I made up. It's called internal family systems. It's a psychotherapy model. But I like to use that as a way of saying, like, there are parts of you that just get behind the driver's seat and you don't realize it. So let's start to bring some awareness to how you do manage and orchestrate and organize your life. And I call it your inner advisory council. So
I like that.
these are the parts of you that are always having conversations that you're having in your head. Um, and we map that out. How do you get through the day? What do you feel like is important? Um, what are your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions that motivate you or propel you to act in the way that you do? And so it helps people kind of separate from their behavior because a lot of times people can say, oh, that's just me. I'm just a yes person. I just avoid conflict. And it's like, it's a part of you.
Mm.
And it feels like it's a part of you and you separate from it a little bit, you feel like you can have some control over it or
Mhm.
some influence in how it shows up in your life. That's where I start.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I see that, through coaching and psychotherapy, hypnotherapy as well, that external locus of control and that stable attribution.
Hmm.
It's like, well, I can't help this. I'm stuck in this way of being. My parents were like this, so I can't have a different experience. And ultimately, once we decide that we want to create change, we can, we've got this beautiful thing called mind plasticity where our brains aren't stuck and we can create new neural pathways. We can have a complete change of experience, a complete change of mindset. And, there's many different ways in which to achieve that, whether it's through, therapy, coaching, hypnotherapy, working even with different plant medicines, working with ceremonial
Hmm.
cacao. I even notice, even I have that every day and, sitting with intention and being in any sort of a ceremony can create change. And, it is about having that awareness of your feelings and allowing the space to feel your feelings and hold that space for yourself to be just like, I'm angry, I'm really sad, I'm
Hmm.
really disappointed, I'm hurt because of this situation, and just allowing those feelings to be there as opposed to making them wrong. And I think
Hmm.
there's I do a lot of work with people around feelings, and I've worked with one particular client where she couldn't identify her feelings because she had been so numb, and she actually got a book. It was almost, I think it was a kid's book that sort of said, these are my feelings, and she's like, yes, that's what I'm feeling.
Hmm.
Because it was like, oh, okay, that's what that is. It had been so long since she'd felt something for so long. And, there is the chance to change, there is the chance to
Hmm.
create a whole new experience of life if we want to, if we allow ourselves to do so. Yeah. What are your thoughts around, boundaries for people pleasers? Like, do you find that people that have these people pleasing tendencies have a lack of boundaries or aren't able to communicate their boundaries because they haven't felt safe to do so previously?
Exactly. The lack of, I think, is really where I first meet people is they want to be able to say no, or I can't do it at 3:30. I can do it, tomorrow at 2:30. But they're convinced and they're already in the feeling of fear that the person that they're going to be sharing that information with is going to be upset with them and
Mm.
criticize them or judge them or, yeah, just create a negative feeling in them. And so they shy away from them. but then they have a lot of built up anger inside that, as you were talking about your client, I was thinking, yeah, the emotional intelligence work and mindfulness of emotion, those can be really helpful to say, like, yeah, you are saying that you can do it at 3:30 today, when it's really a no and something is building up inside, but you haven't addressed that. So setting boundaries is more than just saying, I can do it tomorrow at 2:30 instead of today. There's
Mm.
so much that happens underneath the surface. So um, hurdles around setting boundaries is where I spend a lot of time with people. But
Mm.
I don't even expect clients to just start saying what they want. We have to figure out what's going on internally so that they can begin to say it without having such a, like, cross their fingers, hope the other person understands, and never have to repeat it, never have to stand behind it. Um, so there's a lot of under the surface work that we do to calm down and get clear before we even start to think about what those words would sound like coming out of your mouth.
Absolutely, because that's the thing with boundaries. Like, it's all well and good to have them, but if you can't even get to the point yet where you feel comfortable to not only have them, but to express them and
Mm-hmm.
have someone honor them. And if they don't honor them, then take that step to say, well, hang on a second, you've crossed my boundary, or I'm not comfortable in this place. Or, checking in with your own boundaries to say, do I need to shift the goalpost? Is this me? It's that
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence, isn't it? And when we've had the experience, perhaps growing up through childhood, through jobs we may have had where we have had our boundaries crossed or our feelings stamped down, it is hard to be able to say, well, I didn't even want to make a boundary because I don't even know how to express it because of what might happen.
Right. It stops you before you even let your mind explore what you would want to say.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's where doing some calming of the nervous system can be very helpful. It's also naming what you're feeling, right? And learning how to work with what you're feeling, work through it. And, in mindfulness, we say something arises, it exists, and then it passes away.
mm,
So, recognizing that there is a wave of emotion. So if you have a fear of conflict, it's not, let me just avoid everything that could potentially show up as conflict and scare me. It's, well, let's think through this a little bit and let's identify where we're getting caught in our feeling in our body. And then let's see if we can work with that. Not if, let's see how we can work with that.
mm,
So you can feel calmer inside, and then you can have your prefrontal cortex online for you to actually think through what's true here, what's reality. I know the fear has blocked me, but if I can work through some of that and then get clear about what really is true, um, then maybe I can begin to state what's true for myself
mm.
without having to have it be aggressive or, a whisper. It's like, I'm just communicating with someone. I'm not stating a boundary and preparing for conflict. It's like, I'm just
Mm.
communicating.
Yeah, it's just essentially it's a conversation, isn't it? And
Yes.
it comes back down to feeling empowered and confident to be able to express what it is that you desire and don't desire. If feeling those feelings, like there's so many pieces to this, isn't there?
Yes. That's why I say when people show up and they start to kind of tell the story of where they've been and where they want to go, I want to be able to set boundaries is usually in there somewhere. That's where I want to go. I haven't been able to do it. I've been a doormat or however they judge themselves, and their inner critic is on their butt. And I want to be able to do this thing. And they think that it's such a journey from feeling like a whisper to like shouting it. It really isn't. It's really more about calming a lot of what's happening inside. And then when you're clear about something, you're clear about it. There's not
Mm,
a lot of mind drama around it.
mm,
I always use this example with clients that I don't like tuna fish. I don't like lima beans, like, like the things that you just don't like to eat. So if somebody said, "Hey, you want a tuna fish sandwich?" I would say, "No, thanks."
mm.
I mean, that's sort of setting a boundary. That's definitely saying no to someone, but there's no drama inside because I know clearly that doesn't fit for me. And you can extrapolate on that. And that's the work I do with people. We start small, figuring out what their yeses and nos are, what
Mm.
that feels like in their body, and then move to adding words to it and communicating it.
Yeah. And also, like, I think realizing where they're already unconsciously creating boundaries in their day to day life anyway, realizing that they are doing it in certain situations. It might not be to the level that they want to create and, communicate a new boundary, but every day we're creating a level of boundary. And one of the things that, I love mindset, the subconscious mind, how we process things. And, I think for someone that does have these people pleasing and perfectionism tendencies, that the gap between where they are and where they want to be when it comes to creating these boundaries, they've made it so big in their mind that there's created separation and such a big gap when, if we essentially, and all it is it's a thought process. All we've done is, I
Hmm.
think it's going to be so far away, and there are, techniques in which we can close that gap so that it doesn't feel like it's like a massive Mount Everest in front of us just to create a boundary. In fact, it's like it's a little bump in the road, essentially.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
it's that reframe.
Yeah, and that's where I love mindfulness. That's how it's such a foundation for. I felt like when I sat in a mindfulness class and somebody started sharing mindfulness skills to me, I thought, this is how you do life. Like, why aren't we taught this, as little people to be able to work with what's happening in our inner world so that we aren't just, a bunch of reactivity, pinging from one thing to the next and trying to, find little scraps of safety and connection. Like we could really find it and enjoy it inside of our skin and inside of our minds. And so, yeah, I think that the skills of mindfulness have been enormously helpful for me moving or kind of creating that bridge from where I was to where I am now. And there's still a bridge to be built, right? But it's definitely been something I can lean back on. I know that I can tune in. I call it a U-turn. I can turn my attention back to myself, check in. I actually have some things that I can do to kind of ride the waves of a thought or a feeling or a sensation. And then I feel capable and I feel calmer, and that's what confidence feels like to me. Calm and capable. That's confidence.
I love that. I love that. So, what are some of the ways that people can feel more confident setting boundaries and then sticking to them?
I like to do the parts work. So I like to help them identify that there is a people pleaser part first.
Mm.
And then I like to help them recognize like this is how this people pleaser part has taken the wheel a lot of times. It's because of fear. And so if I can address the fears I have, if somebody is mad at me or doesn't like me, then I have a whole different perspective about how to show up with people. My fear isn't driving the car, and I'm not um, sort of at the mercy of this people pleaser part, trying to figure out how I can be a chameleon and make everybody else, feel comfortable and happy. So I think it's really figuring out what your yes is and what your no is and feeling it in your body. If I can feel a sense of solidity or centeredness or groundedness, and that feels different to me than it would to you if you use those same words. But if I can get that visceral feeling then I know I can trust that. I can find that and I can trust it when I find it, that I can stick behind what the words I'm saying right now about
Mm,
it won't work for me today, but it'll work for me tomorrow. Um, so it's mindfulness and working with the people pleaser part, helping that people pleaser part calm down a little bit and not feel like
mm.
everything is a high level threat if somebody's upset or um, disappointed. That's a kicker for a lot of us. I don't want to
It's a big
disappoint
one, isn't it?
anybody.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Can someone ever really stop being a people pleaser?
Definitely. I mean, you were talking about change earlier, and I believe that these parts of us, once we unblend from them and we move from just getting caught in habitual patterns of saying yes before we even think about it and checking in with ourselves, we can make changes to the way that we show up in relationships. And so, again, I love working with the people pleaser part and saying, this part, we can turn the volume down on this part. It can still be there. You can still be a person that is very perceptive of what other people need, or I call people pleasers great at reading the room, right?
Mm,
You can still have those antennas, but they don't have to be honed into a threat. They don't have to be honed into protection. They can be honed into picking up when a friend needs you to just listen instead of, offer advice or something. They can be ways that you can connect with people where you can feel like you're caring, but it's not draining you. So I don't think we ever get rid of our people pleasing pattern or habit or part of our personality, but we can definitely let it sit in the back seat instead of the driver's seat. And
mm.
again, I think it's by helping ourselves move through the fears we have and the beliefs we have about what will happen if somebody isn't happy with us.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And I like through my own experience, and as you mentioned before, the feeling that we have, so it's the feeling that we get when we create the boundaries and we say yes to what we do want, we say no to what we don't want, we ask for what we want, we
Mhm.
receive or we receive feedback from it. Now knowing how that feels, that has led to being confident and empowered to continue to hold my boundaries so strong, even
Yes.
when I know that it would disappoint another person, or if I know them on an intimate level. I had a family member last year who we'd had some issues in the family where someone got injured and they'd got taken to hospital, and this other family member was just beside themselves with worry. And there was, from my view of the world, there was no need to be so worried, but they took it really, really harsh. Like, this other person that was injured wasn't in, direct harm or anything, direct harm's way, but they took it really personally. And I just said, look, I can't
Mm.
have this conversation on the phone with you right now. I'm just trying to process what has happened. I'm just not in a space to, is your partner with you? Can they hold space for you while you're moving through this? But I need to get off the phone now.
Hmm.
And it was, I think the way it was received is not up to me to try and make them feel better about themselves. It's knowing that, what, they get to have their feeling. If they want to be disappointed, they're welcome to be disappointed. If they want to be angry, if they want to be mad, if they want to go through their process, that is their process. But in order for me to support myself and hold space for myself and process the way I need to process, I need to create this boundary, and I can't be in this conversation right now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a
You
big,
knew.
especially when it comes to family. Oh
Oh,
my
of
gosh.
course. Of course. Yes,
Mm,
because there's so much woven in to
mm,
what we expect of family, what we want. Yeah, sometimes we don't really let them be who they are.
mm,
Uh, but yeah, I like that you created space for yourself and that you knew you needed it.
mm,
Um, and I think, one of the things that's difficult for people pleasers and perfectionists, but people pleasers a little more, is letting other people have their feelings, especially if the other person has uncomfortable feelings. And then especially if the uncomfortable feelings are from something that you've said or
Mm,
done, an effort to take care of yourself. So it's a dance with family members for sure.
mm,
But to trust, I'm going to let you have your feelings about this. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I have to feel guilty.
mm.
Um, I'm aware of what I need right now and I need space. I don't need to talk about this.
Yeah, I've even noticed, creating boundaries or, ending a relationship or a friendship that wasn't thriving. And look, I'm not going to lie, it stings to have to communicate that boundary and say, you've crossed my boundary. This is not okay with me. In fact, you knew my boundary and you did not honor that boundary. Therefore, I'm stepping away from this. To do that, to step away from a friendship or a love or something that, someone that you've really deeply connected with that just does not honor your boundaries, even though love having them in your life, it fucking stings to have to do that
Yes.
sometimes, even as someone who, like myself, who's quite confident in speaking their truth, creating those boundaries, honoring the boundaries. It's still I still get a feeling about it, which obviously as a
Mhm.
human I'm still entitled to those feelings, but I know that, out of every single person in this world, I am always my number one priority. And my priorities are fluid. When I'm with my children, they are my number one. When I'm with my partner, he's my priority. But at the end of the day, I'm always my number one. And if I don't put myself first, then I can't show up as the best mom, the best partner, the best business owner, the best human, the best coach that I can be, because I'm not honoring myself. And I think it comes down to the relationship that you ultimately create with yourself. If you love yourself, then you will do the things, to put yourself first. And that's the empowerment piece for me.
Hmm. Yes, because I call myself a relationship coach, and it's not a lie because it's a relation. I'm helping people build the relationship with themselves,
Mm,
right? And so, yes, the breaking up with the friends, who
mm,
is, you're right, the word sting is a perfect one for it. And I if it's true and if it has space for it, I like to offer in setting boundaries and sticking to them, standing behind them, the acknowledgement of what it's like for the other person to hear it. Because
mm,
I do think that lets them know that there is still, again, if it's true, there is still respect here. There
mm.
is still care here, right? And I am the one that has to live inside my body and brain if we stay in relationship and this boundary isn't respected. But I also want to acknowledge what we've been through together or acknowledge that this is hard to hear right now. So that there's something in there that lets the person know it's not just you stomping your foot and saying, F you, get out of my life. It's, I've thought about this, and I've processed what this conversation means to me,
Mm,
and how it might land for you. So, um, doesn't necessarily have
mm,
to be, I'm sorry, this is hard to hear. You don't have to apologize, but it can just be, I know this is hard to hear. This has been hard for me to work with and
mm,
figure out what to do next. So I like to have that. It makes me feel like at least I'm still showing care
mm,
around boundary
mm.
setting.
I had to go through this process with someone earlier in the year, and everything that you just said then, I was like nodding because I'm like, yes, like I did acknowledge what we'd been through. I acknowledged that we'd had a conversation to try and move through it previously, and then I found out some other things. It was just, for me, it was too far. It was too far over the
Hmm.
boundary, and yes, there is always space for forgiveness, and I don't harbor any anger. I feel like I'm much better off without that relationship. And it's interesting because there's been another time this year, completely different situation in person, where I was just like, I'm fucking done. I'm out, you know? And
Right.
and usually I'm the type of person that likes to talk about things and move through that. But I also know that
Hmm.
the other person would probably be like, why is she still talking? So
Yes,
it's
there's no
about reading the
openness.
room.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's about reading the room and just going, okay, yep, no, this person's open to hearing that I am, I'm graciously, leaving their life because we're just
Hmm.
not aligned in our values anymore. Um, and then sometimes you just have to slam the door shut as well, if someone really
You
crosses
do.
that boundary.
You do. And it's for safety. I mean, I think that's a
Mm,
lot of what's underneath people pleasing and perfectionism anyway. It's creating connection so I can feel safe, right? If I
mm,
can ensure that you like me, so I'll keep doing these things, doing it right, getting the accolades that I'm doing it right and making these, super high achievement um, bars for myself. If I can keep doing those things, I feel connected to you. And if there's connection, I feel safe. But
mm,
if there's not safety, if I've done what I need to do to be in a relationship and I still don't feel safe, then exiting is it, number one, yes, hard, stings, but I'm the one that has to live inside that feeling of not being feeling safe or respected or cared for. And sometimes it is a hard line in the sand, a rigid boundary, whatever you want to call it. It's
mm.
just like no, and there's really no conversation to be had.
It's done.
And
Yeah.
it's done.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I want to circle back to something that you said earlier. You mentioned the nervous system, and this is one of my favorite things because everything comes back to our nervous system, doesn't it? If we have a regulated nervous system, if we're able to, exist more in our parasympathetic nervous system, so the rest and digest that we're in, we are able to think more clearly. We
Hmm.
are able to speak our truth because, when we're in the state of that fight, flight, or freeze, or the sympathetic nervous system, where even though as humans we're designed to, go into this state because it is there to keep us safe. In our day and age, in our, essentially our collective consciousness over the last few years, we're hanging out here far too often, and everyone
Yep.
is a little bit fried, and everyone is just clinging to their own version of truth. Everyone is clinging to, okay, I have to work, I have to do this, I have to hustle, I have to drink all the coffee to stay awake to do the things because I've got the deadlines and I have to be this and all of the things, right? And this is
Hmm.
why I feel like time feels like it's speeding up because everyone's just on this fast trajectory to
Hmm.
get somewhere. Like all of this, there's just so much stuff happening at the moment. And it all comes back to our nervous system because until we're actually in that rest and digest phase where we can actually think clearly, where we can actually think from a peaceful perspective as opposed to reactive, when we're responding instead of reacting, instead of like for me at the time, I was very much in the stress state. When I slammed the door shut on the person, I was like, I'm out.
Hmm.
Go fuck yourself, right? I was in a very stressed state at the time. And I can reflect on that now and be like, okay, this is where there's room for growth in my life. This is where I can communicate on a different level. It's all about those learning things. But and I have awareness though of when my nervous system is not okay or when I'm just pushing too hard. What would you say, like, obviously, like you mentioned, working with the nervous system, what is your view of the world, around the people pleasers and the nervous system? Do you find that there is a link between the two of them?
Like that, yes. Because it is reactive, right? It's a defense mechanism, it's a coping strategy to look outward and try to calm other people down, whether that means making them happy, whether that means staying out of their way. It's definitely a coping skill. So it lets you know that something's firing inside where I don't feel like I'm in a safe and connected place. So there's two sentences that I borrow from Deb Dana, who does polyvagal theory work, and it'll let you know where you are in your nervous system. she has like three different sections of the nervous system that she breaks it up for us lay people. Um, and one is safe and connected, one is fight, flight, or fawn, which is people pleasing, which is the activated sympathetic nervous system. And then the other one is freeze, which is going to my turtle shell, numb out. So the two sentences that she uses that I always share with clients to help you figure out where you are is, I am fill in the blank, and the world is fill in the blank. So if you're in a space of sympathetic arousal, is what they call it, right? Reactivity, fight or flight, then you could answer that question of, I am scared, I am agitated, I am anxious. And then you answer or fill in the blank of, the world is too big, overwhelming, moving too fast. So I like to let people know, like, they can always use those as ways to figure out where they are. It might be kind of interesting to fill in those blanks when you're in freeze, right?
Mm,
But it could be, I am numb and the world is very far away, or something like that.
mm,
So I like using that as a way of pinpointing where you are. And I think for people pleasers, some of those fill in the blank questions can be they're pretty similar, right?
mm,
I'm anxious is a great one, and the world is a big place. The world is overwhelming, or something like that.
mm,
Um, so there is definitely a connection between feeling fight, flight, or fawn, which I love that there's now fawn as an option,
mm,
because it is people pleasing to a T. And the way that the outward behavior reflects what's happening in your inner world. And so therefore, inner world is nervous system. Where am I? Am I in sympathetic, or am I feeling safe and connected?
mm. I love that. I love that. If you could give like the listeners a piece of advice, what would that be?
Just a general piece of advice
Just a
around
general
this.
piece of advice. Yeah.
I think it would be around self-compassion. I
Mm,
think it would be around curiosity, learning the skill of curiosity, so that when you turn towards yourself, you can be curious about what's happening. That's how you're going to get to know all these things we've been talking about today, what your body feels like, what's happening in your nervous system, um, how to get your thoughts clear, how to feel empowered. We have to start with learning to be curious about what our current experience is.
I love that so much. I love it. Vicki, this has been absolutely incredible to talk about. I am so passionate about this topic and, supporting people to have a different experience of life. And like you said, to
Yes.
be curious, and to, if you want to live an incredible life, an even more incredible life, you have to put yourself first. And one of those things is checking in with, is there those people pleasing tendencies, or those lack of boundaries, or all of the things that we've talked about today. How is it that people can get in touch with you, work with you, find you? How do we connect?
Oh, yes. So I'm on Instagram, Power to the Pleasers, website, same, Power to the Pleasers. And I do one-on-one coaching with people. I also have a new masterclass coming out in the beginning of the year about decision making,
Mm-hmm.
how we can actually choose ourselves without guilt, and kind of decision making without having all the mind chatter and self doubt. So that'll be available for folks in the beginning of the year, and you can find it on the website. And of course, I'll be talking about it on social media.
Of course, of
um,
course.
yeah, and
Amazing.
I also have a podcast of the same name, Power to the Pleasers. So there's lots of
Amazing.
ways.
We will link to all of those things in the show notes. So for those that are tuning in, so the masterclasses will be live in January 2023. Is that something that will be available for replay afterwards, Vicki?
Oh, definitely. Yes,
Okay.
definitely. I think I
Amazing.
might even skip a live version of it and just go ahead and get it out because it's right there and it's ready,
Mm,
and so people don't have to sign up for the live version. They can just get it when they need it, and it's available.
that's perfect. I love that. And before I let you go, I've got one last question. To you, what is the meaning of life?
Oh God. I love your heavy hitter questions. They're making me think about stuff. Um, I think it's connection.
Mm,
And I don't think that it has to be connection with people. I think can be connection with nature, connection with spirit, um, and then, of course, connection with yourself. So I really feel like knowing yourself is that's what I think our life lessons are about. So the meaning of life is how do we connect? How do we connect to ourselves and something bigger?
I love that so much. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I have loved chatting with you about all things nervous system, people pleasing, perfectionism, and you've given some great advice to our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I've loved hearing your perspective and your take on things as well. I might credit you and borrow some of the things that you said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Vicki.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.